But there's something about Van Gogh's legacy which is much more important than his fathering this or that ism of modern art. Vincent's passionate belief was that people wouldn't just see his pictures, but feel the rush of life in them.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most trusted voice in true crime. I should probably tell you that in this episode, for the first time, I'm going to be revealing who I think murdered Vincent van Gogh. He's going to be introduced really for the first time in 1890 directly. And this is pretty much 4 months to the day before Vincent van Gogh loses his life. So this is quite a significant moment when these letters come through. So 130 years ago today was obviously the 29th of March, but it was the day before Van Gogh's 37th birthday and what would end up being his final birthday. So he basically died at 37 years and about 4 months on the 29th of July. And as I've sort of emphasized previously, Van Gogh was kind of in a similar situation to the one the whole world finds itself in right now, which is a scenario of self-isolation, which is to some extent voluntary and to some extent kind of one doesn't really have a choice. And the difference here is, some people are finding it hard to self-isolate for a day or a week or whatever. Van Gogh was kind of doing it for around about a year. And at this point, he really wanted to get out of the asylum. He wanted to see his family. His brother had a child. He wanted to, see his brother's child and sort of, join up with his family again. He'd been sort of pretty much alone in the asylum, with no real friends for a year. It's not very easy to do. So what's quite interesting on the 29th is we're going to be dealing with 2 letters, not just one. The one letter is from Theo's wife, Jo, and we'll go through that one first. And the other is from Theo himself, and that is a really incredible letter, as you're going to see in a moment. Something else just to bear in mind is, how did Van Gogh get through this horrible period where he was isolated? And the answer is, he kept himself busy. He was creative, he painted. You might also say, how did Van Gogh get through this period without going mad? Same answer. He was creative, he stayed busy. He maintained an authentic contact with the people closest to him. And he kind of had hope for the future. He had a plan for what he wanted to do. So all of this kind of stuff is food for thought. It certainly gives us a sense of perspective in the situation we find ourselves in. I am putting up a book on Patreon. It's kind of like a short narrative called Redemption Awaits, and it deals with so some of them are my insights. As a writer, as an author, I know all about self-isolation. I mean, a lot of it is working from home, working constantly, and dealing with things like, writing is a lonely job, and dealing with things like, how do you stay fit and healthy? How do you maintain your mental health? How do you persevere with something like this and make it work for you, right? So that's something that's on the Patreon channel with some really interesting philosophy on the topic and some insights. And I've kind of gone into some contemporary culture stuff like Westworld and so on, just giving the sense of of how the world has become kind of a playground for this invisible thing, and it's acting against our own narcissism. And what are we to do with it? How are we to respond to it? Why is it happening? Is it going to happen again? All that kind of thing. Anyway, so let's get going with the letters, and let's start with the one from Jo van Gogh, who's Theo's wife, and this is written from Paris. Dear Vincent, among all the letters from brothers and sisters, mine wishing you the best may not be missing tomorrow, and I do it at the same time on behalf of your godchild, who can't do it very well himself yet. He always looks with very great interest at Uncle Vincent's paintings, though in particular the tree in blossom that hangs over our bed really fascinates him, and the Rembrandt too, although I can't swear that it isn't the gold frame that attracts him. He's thriving, fortunately. We're longing to show him to you. But there's still a whole art to being father and mother. Perhaps it's because I've had to learn and experience so many things in this one year, because I've never heard other people talk about it like this. They had a child and then everything was all right and happened of its own accord. But with me it's not like that. What surprises me most is that such a tiny baby already has its own personality, in the face of which you're utterly powerless. He can sometimes look at me as if he wants to say, "What are you actually doing to me? I know much more about things than you do." They're the eyes of a grown-up, and then with a great deal of expression. Could he have the makings of a philosopher? He doesn't leave his mother much free time at all, but I did escape briefly for the opening of the Independence to see your paintings hanging. There was a bench just in front, and while Theo talked to all sorts of people, I spent a quarter of an hour enjoying the wonderful coolness and freshness of the undergrowth. It's as if I know that little spot and have often been there. I love it so much. It's like summer here, indescribably hot, and I think with dread of the hot days still to come. It sounds a bit like sacrilege, with that first delicate tender green on the trees now, but after all I like the winter much better. I must make haste to end my letter because Theo's waiting for it. With best wishes, your loving Jo. And that's it. It's quite an interesting letter from Jo, in the sense that she sounds like she's got quite a lot of respect for his art, and I think the thing that stands out the most to me is this thing where she says it's like summer here, indescribably hot. Now bear in mind this was 130 years ago, and it's the 29th of March. Now, I was in Paris in May last year, late May, and it was pretty. It was sort of mild. It certainly wasn't hot, and that's basically 2 months after this letter was written. So, you talk about climate change. It's quite interesting just that what she's saying here about how hot it was in Paris at that time of the year. So, that's just kind of an interesting thing to note in terms of the passage of time between then and now. The fact that we've got the original letter written by Jo, the fact that it's written in a different hand to Theo's letter, just gives this all a sense of reality, doesn't it? That there really was this young woman. She'd just become a mother, and she's writing to this brother of her husband, who's kind of is a strange fellow. He's painting a lot. Her husband is an art dealer, but he's also a bit of a troublemaker and a bit of a troublesome fellow. And she's trying to just sort of maintain good relations, but one wonders what she sort of made of him as well at that time. She doesn't really write letters to him otherwise. There are not really that many letters from her. But obviously on his birthday she's wishing him well and letting him know that they want him to meet their child. Okay, and so let's move on to the letter from Theo. And we've also got a copy of that letter. And can you imagine just kind of going back in time, looking at, and bear in mind all of these are handwritten letters, going back in time, seeing like almost in a close-up, like in a movie, seeing Theo's hand scribbling these thoughts and ideas and emotions in real time. What did he look like? What did he hear? What did Paris look like outside his window? What were certain things like? The temperature. What did they say besides in the letter? To each other about Vincent. What do they talk about? And obviously they didn't have television, they didn't have radio, they didn't have the internet. So they would probably, make a fire or put up a candle or whatever. And over dinner, maybe they would talk about the news. And certainly what was going on with Vincent would have preoccupied them. Anyway, here's Theo's letter. And although it's the same number of pages as Jo's, it's sort of got a bit more of a punch to it, if that makes sense. And so obviously this was also written from Paris. My dear Vincent, how pleased I would be to be able to go and see you tomorrow to shake your hand on your birthday. Will it be a celebration for you, or are you still in a state where you find yourself unhappy? What do you do during the day, and have you something to do to distract yourself? Can you read, and do you have what you need? I was hoping after your last letter that you had begun to convalesce, and that soon afterwards you would have written that you were feeling better. My dear brother, how sad it is to be so far from one another, and to know so little of what the other is doing. That's why I'm very happy to be able to tell you that I've met Dr. Gachet. That Dr. Pissarro had spoken to me about. He looks like a man who understands things well. He resembles you a little. When you come here, we'll go and see him. He comes to give consultations in Paris several times a week. He said to me when I told him how your crises occurred that he didn't believe this had anything to do with madness, and that if it was what he thought, he replied that he would cure you, but he needed to see you and talk to you to be able to give his opinion with greater certainty. He's a man who can be very useful to us if you come here. Have you spoken to Dr. Peyron about it yet, and what does he say about it? I haven't yet gone back to the Independence, but Pissarro, who went there every day, tells me that you have a real success among the artists. There are also art lovers who spoke to me about it before I'd pointed them out to them. The newspapers which give an account of the exhibition are silent on the Impressionist Hall. That's still the best they can do for the majority of these critics. You know very well what they're worth. The weather here is beginning to be really spring-like. This afternoon, Jo and the child were in the little square in front of the Trinity. The shrubs are beginning to become green, and the trees are showing green points on the buds. Everything was bathed in benevolent sunshine, and the grey of the church against the intense blue of the sky was really beautiful. Jo and the child are doing well. From time to time there is of course something amiss, but nothing serious. The doctor who came this week said that he was a magnificent child and paid Jo compliments. You'll see how funny his movements are. My dear brother, I have a great desire to hear if you're feeling better, and to have details about your health. Be of good heart and remain hopeful that things will get better soon. I'm sending you a few reproductions of etchings by Rembrandt. They're so beautiful. Good handshake, and believe me, your brother who loves you, Theo. It's hard to believe, but it would be more than 3 long weeks before there was another letter. So we don't really know whether Vincent replied to this letter, but we do know that Theo, the next letter that we're going to look at, is from Theo to Vincent on the 23rd of April. That letter does seem to suggest that there'd been virtually no letters in that interim, because he starts off saying, on the 23rd of April, my dear Vincent, your silence proves to us that you're suffering. And he says, Jo and I are also suffering, knowing that you're ill. And they, thinking about finding some way of helping him. And Vincent van Gogh would only write back to his brother on Tuesday the 29th of April, so a whole month later. It's not clear whether his not writing back was intentional, whether it was to worry them, was to get them kind of agitated so that they would make a plan, right? But I wouldn't be surprised if that isn't the case. Now, to analyze Theo's letter, there are a couple of things I want to highlight. First of all, when kind of in the first line or so, Theo kind of diagnoses his brother, where he says, will you still be in a state where you find yourself unhappy? In other words, he's saying, I wonder what your birthday is going to be like. Are you going to celebrate, or are you going to be kind of depressed? And it kind of sounds like he's saying, he's sort of seeing his brother as depressed and kind of down, if that makes sense. Again, there's nothing in the letter about, are you getting the right medicine for your bipolar disorder? Are you being treated for your schizophrenia? Are you having any fits? Nothing like that. He does talk about him convalescing, which is another word for healing. And what is really interesting is he refers for the first time to Dr. Gachet, and we are going to be talking about him more and more over the next 4 months. And this is someone who Pissarro had mentioned to, an artist called Pissarro had mentioned to Theo in October 1889. And between October 1889 and March 1990, Dr. Gachet has never really been mentioned, right? So he's mentioned for the first time in October 1889, and Van Gogh doesn't seem to really respond to the idea, but then it comes up again in March 1890, and then it is going to gain some traction. So we will look at that letter, I think, in April, from Vincent van Gogh, I think the 29th of April, and see what he says about Dr. Gachet. Now, a couple of other things just to highlight from Theo's letter is he talks about the doctor looks like you a little. He says he resembles you slightly, meaning probably that he also has kind of ginger hair, and perhaps he sort of resembles him a little bit in manner. In fact, when Vincent van Gogh actually met the doctor, he said, wow, this guy reminds me of me, and he's even madder than I am, right? Not literally mad, but someone who's kind of eccentric and strange and weird, I guess. And he says, and this is very, very important, Theo says that the doctor, when he explained the crises that his brother's experiencing, so Theo is talking to Dr. Gachet and explaining, this is what's going on, maybe it happens more in winter, blah, 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 blah. And based on Theo's description, he relays what the doctor says to him, which is he didn't believe that this has anything to do with madness. Now, it's this kind of thing that kind of makes you wonder, why the hell would the Van Gogh Museum peddle this whole myth about madness when his own brother is saying to him, I don't think you're mad. The Van Gogh Museum had an exhibition not that long ago titled On the Verge of Insanity. And I'll tell you why. I'll tell you why the Van Gogh Museum liked the idea. Because it sells. Van Gogh is known as the mad artist. So if you take the mad out of the title, then he's the artist. He's like everybody else. And so the mad artist gives Van Gogh a lot of color, and it certainly fits with his wonderfully vivid artwork. It's almost like they're saying, through this madness we get this incredible interpretation of the human condition and of life and of art and the universe, or something like that. It's almost as if there's some kind of epiphany through the, like when people take recreational drugs and you have some deep epiphany. And there are some writers and artists who feel like they can't write or create anything of any significance without being high. And so that's kind of the sense that I think people get from Van Gogh. So you take away the madness, and then suddenly it's so he's just like everybody else, I guess, right? The problem is that is a deceitful story. If you're going to tell a story to sell, to like a PR story, so that artwork is going to be worth more, it's basically greedy people lying to one another to make money, isn't it? It's not telling the real story of Vincent van Gogh, is it? So anyway, this is a great example of where Van Gogh's madness is addressed specifically and directly, and in a way that doesn't support the current mainstream narrative. Do you see that? And this isn't just a chance comment in a letter in the middle of nowhere. This is the person closest to Vincent van Gogh, his own brother, giving him a doctor's assessment based on what he is saying, what the closest person to Vincent van Gogh is saying to the doctor. And he's saying, I don't think it has anything to do with madness. So what can be a bigger invalidation, counterfeiting of the mainstream narrative of this whole madness bullshit than this particular statement in the letter? But why do you have to go and search to find stuff like this? Why instead you have all of this muddying PR trying to say, well, we're not quite sure what condition he had, but blah, blah, blah. And then you leave it to the public to sort of join the dots and say, oh yeah, I think Vincent van Gogh was mad. He cut off his ear, didn't he? Problem is, it's just very unscientific, it's very uninformed, and it's not what the people at the heart of the story were saying themselves to one another. Theo also recommends that Vincent talk to his own doctor at Saint-Remy, Dr. Perron, and he says, talk to him about Dr. Gachet. He can transfer you essentially to the custody of another doctor, and let the doctor know that we don't think you're mad, and this guy can kind of treat you. And then there's quite a lot of discussion about art and artists and exhibitions. You can see that that's what the family are kind of interested in, and there's some sort of resignation and sort of unhappiness about the fact that the French art critics aren't really interested in the new kind of art that Vincent van Gogh is painting. That they're still stuck on the Impressionists, people like Monet and Manet and so on, Serrat and all that. And then he also talks about the weather. He says it's really spring-like. Jo describes it as very hot, but he's just saying that, well, spring is springing, and what the shrubs are looking at like, and all of this is sort of agitating everybody for a change. It's sort of the grayness in Paris, the coldness in France is making way for summer, and this is about to be the final summer the last journey of Vincent van Gogh, into that summer and through that summer. And it was an extraordinary journey. It was without those paintings that he painted, something like 70 paintings in the space of, about 60 days or so. Van Gogh's legacy would be less than what it actually is. So he did a heck of a lot to establish his legend in those final weeks, especially with Wheatfield with Crows, which is arguably the most valuable Vincent van Gogh artwork, and possibly one of the most valuable in the world. So these are some of the dynamics that are reaching to Van Gogh in the asylum. He wants to leave the asylum, and they have now kind of found a doctor that he can go to. Spring is also springing, and then there's also this little child who they want the child's uncle to meet. They want Vincent van Gogh to meet. And so all of this is slowly pushing Vincent van Gogh, or pulling him out of the confines that he's been used to. The asylum has become almost like a prison, but at the same time it's a cage that I think he may be afraid to leave. And he needs to go somewhere where he's going to be safe and where there's not too much going on. He needs kind of a cloistered, quiet environment where he can paint and where there's not going to be a lot of noise and kind of chaos, where he can continue to heal and try and find his way back to some kind of health, including and especially his mental health. The more interesting question is, as I say, after this very nice letter on his birthday, Van Gogh is silent for a month. And why do you think that is? Okay, so I'm not going to take it further than that. I'm not sure when I'm going to be back on YouTube talking about Van Gogh again. As I say, the next letter is a month from now. What I might do between, or in the month of April, what I might do is take you on a journey that I took through all last year in May. So I was in France, in Arles in May, which is right next to Saint-Remy. And I can, take you through some of the photos that I took when I was there, which is a little bit like leaving your home wherever you are in the world and going into France. And I can just take you through some of the days that I experienced when I was in France, some of the experiences I had with some of the locals, and then also how I then followed Vincent van Gogh, by train to Paris, kind of at the same time of the year, and then from Paris to Auvers-sur-Oise, which that part I kind of want to do in June and July. So I can maybe take you through all. I took a lot of photos when I was there, and just share with you a little bit what that felt like, what some of the sights and sounds. In terms of Patreon, some of you may not be aware, I probably update articles. I write short little pieces about true crime in various areas. Some of them are to do with Gannon Stork, some of them are to do with Chris Watts, some of them are to do with certain other people, other high-profile criminals. But it's basically updated every single day. And then there are various series that are going on kind of consecutively and at the same time, simultaneously. There's one on the Kessinger tapes that is, I think, every Wednesday. And then I do Christopher Watts, What Else Do We Know, every second Friday. And but there's quite a lot of content there. So if you're interested, head on over to Patreon/TCRS. There are also a bunch of audiobooks. Right now I'm uploading an audiobook on Scott Peterson, Blood and Seawater. That's almost done. And then I'll probably upload the next Chris Watts book, Two-Face, Rape of Cassandra. Just a final note in terms of Patreon, I'm also doing a daily coronavirus diary. I didn't think people would be really interested in it, but there is quite a lot of interest in it. And every day I just update the latest stats, and then I just provide a little bit of insight into what's going on in my world about it. And a little bit of commentary and a little bit of research in terms of the rest of the world. I provide some graphs and I provide some analysis, but there's also just the whole human side of, how do we deal with this? And there's quite a nice little community developing around that where people share their thoughts, their feelings, and all that kind of thing. And I feel the Vincent van Gogh story is a kind of extension of that. It helps us to understand that we're not the first people to be in the situation where our health is at risk, we're alone, and we don't know what's happening. And because someone like Vincent van Gogh went through it, people in the Holocaust went through it, people who, there's the plague, I think, of 1666 and so on. So all of this kind of thing has happened before. And, I think in a basic way, we need to respond with a sense of humor, and we also need to respond by finding meaning in what is going on and, developing kind of little communities of resilience, reservoirs of sort of resources, even if they're only psychological resources. So if you're interested, head on over to Patreon. It's patreon.com/TCRS. And I will see you guys next time for the next letter on Vincent van Gogh about a month from now. But wherever you are, stay safe, stay healthy, get enough sleep, eat well, and be sure to subscribe to this channel, like, share, and leave a comment.